Is that a real rank? Or did they start giving them out in cereal boxes for the JAG Corps? The voice, a rasping baritone accustomed to shouting over the roar of helicopter rotors and gunfire, cut through the low din of the mess hall at Forward Operating Base Archer. The crowd, a motley collection of tired soldiers, sun-baked Marines, and a tight, clannish group of Navy SEALs, rippled with nervous laughter. A few of the SEALs, orbiting their leader like moons around a gas giant, smirked in open agreement. The object of the jeer, a slight lieutenant commander with pale blue eyes behind standard-issue glasses, offered no reaction. She did not flinch. Her gaze did not lift from the meticulously separated portions of reconstituted eggs and turkey bacon on her tray. Her posture remained unchanged, a study in quiet, unassuming stillness. But when the base commander, a man who had seen 3 decades of war from the bridge of a carrier in the dust of forgotten deserts, happened to glance over from the command table and saw the way her left hand rested beside her plate, fingers slightly curled, thumb indexed along the edge as if holding a precision grip. A flicker of something ancient and knowing crossed his face. He saw not a lawyer, but a weapon at rest. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type competence below. This story was not about the insult. It was about the answer. An answer that would be delivered not in words, but in a single, perfectly executed moment of violence that would redefine the meaning of respect for every soul on that base and etch a new name into the rolls of battlefield legends. It was a story about the deafening power of silence and the humbling truth that the most dangerous predators are the ones you never, ever see coming. The man who had spoken, Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, was the walking embodiment of a recruiting poster. A slab of sun-bronzed muscle carved from granite and cynicism. His arms were a tapestry of unit tattoos and faded scars, each one a silent testament to a life lived at the razor's edge. He carried his authority not just in the silver star that marked his rank, but in the sheer physical space he occupied, a gravitational field of arrogant confidence that warped the room around him. To him, the world was simple, divided into 2 camps: assets and liabilities, predators and prey, operators and support. And as his gaze swept over Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed, he saw nothing but a liability. He saw a pencil pusher, a REMF, someone who existed to shuffle paperwork while men like him bled. Her uniform, while crisp and correct, lacked the faded, salt-stained patina of hard use he respected. Her hands were clean, her face unlined by the harsh kiss of sun and wind that marked his tribe. He saw weakness. He saw a soft target in a hard place, and his contempt was a physical thing, an acrid taste in the air. Seriously, he continued, his voice louder now, playing to the room, I got E4s in my platoon who've spent more time outside the wire than you've spent outside an office. What does a lieutenant commander in the Judge Advocate General's Corps even do out here? File reports on our harsh language? Sue the enemy for violating our feelings? More laughter, this time bolder. Thorne leaned forward, planting his huge hands on the table across from her, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending growl. Look, ma'am, he said, dripping sarcasm on the honorific, this isn't a courtroom. This is the pointy end of the spear. People get hurt here. Maybe you should stick to the green zone where it's safe still. She did not look up. She took her fork and methodically cut another perfect square of egg. The only sign of acknowledgement was the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, a subtle shift in the muscle that a lesser observer would miss entirely. But Admiral Vance, watching from across the hall, saw it. He also saw the rhythmic, steady beat of the pulse in her neck, a human metronome ticking at a placid 60 beats per minute in a room thick with testosterone and tension. He had seen that same unnatural calm before, in other places, in other people. It was the calm of the bomb disposal technician approaching the device. It was the calm of the test pilot hitting Mach 3 for the first time. It was the calm of absolute, unshakable, and terrifying competence. The mess hall was a microcosm of the entire military caste system. The operators, the SEALs, the Green Berets, the MARSOC Raiders, held court at the central tables, their laughter loud, their gear casually strewn on adjacent chairs, marking their territory. The support personnel, the logistics clerks, the intel analysts, the mechanics filled the periphery, their conversations quieter, their presence more subdued. It was an ecosystem built on a hierarchy of perceived risk. Lieutenant Commander Reed, by all outward appearances, belonged firmly at the bottom of that food chain. She was an anomaly, a question mark in a place that preferred declarative statements. She ate alone, she walked alone, and she spoke to no one unless spoken to first. Her silence was interpreted as timidity, her solitude as fear. The assumptions hardened into fact in the minds of men like Thorne. They created a narrative for her, a story of a careerist officer ticking a box with a hardship tour, utterly divorced from the brutal reality of their world. They could not have been more wrong. The first piercing shriek of the base-wide alarm ripped through the mess hall just as Thorne was winding up for another verbal jab. The CRAM, counter-rocket, artillery, mortar, system, the automated phalanx cannons that guarded the FOB, began its terrifying, guttural roar, BRRRT, a sound that meant incoming threats were seconds away. Trays clattered to the floor. Chairs scraped violently as bodies scrambled for cover, a conditioned reflex for everyone on the base. Everyone, that is except one. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed placed her fork and knife neatly together on her plate, parallel to the edge. She took a final sip of water, her movements unhurried, deliberate, almost serene amidst the rising tide of panic. As the all-clear siren blared a moment later, signifying the CRAM had successfully intercepted the threat, a new alarm took its place, a frantic, high-pitched warble reserved for the most dire of circumstances, a mass casualty event, a direct ground assault, or what was happening now, a complex attack on a friendly target just outside the wire. A voice, tight with adrenaline, crackled over the base-wide intercom. All personnel, code red. I repeat, code red. Valkyrie element is engaged. Repeat, Valkyrie is engaged. Hostage situation at the Dawasi Center. All QRF teams to the JOC immediately. Valkyrie was Thorne's team. The Dawasi Center was a civilian-run medical clinic less than a click from the FOB's perimeter, a designated soft target, a chill cut through the humid air. While others were still processing, Reed was already moving. She didn't run. She moved with a fluid, economical grace, a straight line of purpose through the chaotic eddies of the emptying mess hall. Her path was not toward a bunker, but toward the one place on the base that had just become the nexus of the entire war, the Joint Operations Center, the JOC. The JOC was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Men and women with headsets shouted call signs and coordinates. Giant screens showed a dozen different feeds, a Predator drone's grainy overhead view, tactical maps blinking with friendly and enemy icons, a frantic live feed from a SEAL's helmet cam. Admiral Vance stood at the center of it all, a grim statue of command, his face illuminated by the flickering data streams. Thorne's voice, strained and breathless, came over the main speaker. Rhino 6, this is Valkyrie Actual. We are pinned down. Pinned. Down. We have multiple shooters, elevated positions, southeast and southwest corners of the main building. They have the clinic director, Dr. Eris. They're holding him on the roof, west side. We can't get a clean line of sight. Any assault is a no-go. The doc is a dead man if we push on the main screen. The Predator feed zoomed in. You could see the terrifying tableau. A man in medical scrubs on his knees, a masked insurgent behind him with a pistol to his head. On the other side of the roof, another insurgent held a detonator, wired to something unseen. It was a classic, brutal checkmate. The helmet cam feed lurched as one of Thorne's men tried to shift position, immediately followed by the sharp crackle of incoming sniper fire and a curse. They've got us bracketed 6. We can't move. Thorne yelled. The room was thick with helplessness. The intel officer confirmed the hostage was a British national, a high-value civilian. The rules of engagement were tightening around them like a noose. A kinetic strike was out. A rescue attempt was suicide. They were watching a man die in high definition. It was into this vortex of desperation that Lieutenant Commander Reed stepped. She didn't announce herself. She simply appeared at the shoulder of a young Air Force captain who was frantically trying to manipulate the targeting pod of a Reaper drone circling high above. The captain was sweating, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to get a laser designation on one of the snipers. But the angle was impossible without endangering the hostage. "Let me see," Reed said. Her voice was not a request. It was a quiet, firm statement of fact. It cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. The captain, startled, looked up at her, then at Admiral Vance, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. The captain slid out of the chair. Reed slid in. Her movements were a symphony of practiced efficiency. Her right hand danced over the keyboard, typing in a string of authorization codes so fast the letters blurred on the screen. Her left hand settled onto the joystick, the one that controlled the drone's gimbaled sensor ball. Her posture in the chair was perfect, her back straight, her elbows at a precise 90-degree angle. She wasn't just sitting, she was docking with the machine, becoming a part of it. "Requesting tactical handover of asset Go 79er," she said, her voice calm and clear, directed at the air. "I need full manual control of the weapons system. Override protocol Zulu Alpha 9. A stunned silence fell over the operators at the console bank. Zulu Alpha 9 was a highly classified protocol, one that bypassed nearly all of the system's automated safety features and fire control interlocks. It was reserved for experimental weapons, testing, and scenarios of extreme exigency. It gave a single operator godlike control over the drone's payload. "Who the hell is this?" someone muttered. But Admiral Vance's voice was like iron. "Give it to her." Now, on the screen, the Reaper's feed flickered, and then the telemetry data changed. The automated targeting brackets vanished. The display simplified, becoming a raw, direct feed from the optics. Reed was now flying the weapon, not just the camera. Her fingers played across the controls, a blur of micro-adjustments. She wasn't just looking at the target. She was tasting the air, feeling the crosswind at 20,000 feet, calculating the milliseconds of latency in the satellite data link. Over the comms, Thorne's frustration boiled over. "Rhino 6, what is going on? We are seconds from losing him. We need a solution now." Reed ignored him. Her entire universe had shrunk to the glowing screen and the pressure of the controls under her fingertips. She zoomed the camera in, not on a hostage-taker, but on a small satellite dish mounted on the edge of the roof, just a few feet away. She painted it with a laser so precise it was invisible to the naked eye. Then she selected her weapon, not a Hellfire missile. That would vaporize the entire roof. She selected something else, an option on her screen labeled simply R9X mod for the R9X, known to insiders as the Flying Ginsu, was a Hellfire variant with no explosive warhead. Instead, it deployed a halo of 6 long, tungsten blades just before impact, designed for pinpoint assassinations with minimal collateral damage. The Mod 4 was an experimental version, not officially in the inventory, a ghost weapon for a ghost operator. Her thumb rested on the red fire button. She took a single, slow breath in and out. "Valkyrie, be advised," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "Splash in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, she pressed the button. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. On the screen, the scene on the roof remained static. The insurgent still held the pistol to the doctor's head. Thorne's voice, raw with disbelief and fury, started to come over the comms. "What did you?" He was cut off by a sudden, violent flicker in the drone feed. It wasn't an explosion. It was more like a glitch, a blink-and-you-miss-it distortion. On the roof, the insurgent holding the hostage simply collapsed. He didn't fly backward. He folded, like a marionette whose strings had been simultaneously cut. His pistol clattered harmlessly to the concrete. The second insurgent, the one with the detonator, spun around in confusion, and in that instant, a second flicker occurred. He too crumpled to the ground in a heap. The doctor, untouched, scrambled away on his hands and knees, disbelief and terror warring on his face. In the JOC, There was a deafening silence. Every person in the room stared, mouths agape, at the main screen. The drone feed zoomed in, the optics so powerful you could see the individual grains of concrete on the roof. Where the two insurgents had been standing, there was nothing. No blood pool, no scorch marks, no crater, just two inert forms, and if you looked closely, 6 impossibly straight, impossibly fine lines scored into the concrete around them, the only signature of the blades. It was not an act of war. It was an act of surgery, performed from 20,000 feet with a satellite relay. It was impossible. The physics were impossible. The precision was impossible. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the act was beyond comprehension. On the comms, there was only static, then a single, choked whisper from Senior Chief Thorne. Jesus Christ. Who? Who took that shot? His voice was stripped bare of all its earlier arrogance. In its place was a raw, primal awe, the sound of a man who had just witnessed a miracle and was terrified by it. He had spent his life defining the limits of human capability in combat, and someone, somewhere, had just shattered those limits with the push of a button from a padded chair miles away. He had asked for a solution, and he had been given a ghost. He had mocked a lawyer, and had been saved by an angel of death. The room remained silent. The only sound the quiet hum of the servers and the frantic, relieved sobs of the rescued doctor, now coming through an open comms channel. Lieutenant Commander Reed's hands had already left the controls. She was looking at the after-action report data, scrolling on a secondary monitor, her expression as neutral and unreadable as it had been in the mess hall. For her, the impossible act was already a data point, a logged event to be analyzed and filed. The miracle was just another day at the office. Admiral Vance let the silence hang in the air, letting the weight of the impossible settle onto every shoulder in the room. He let them absorb the visual on the screen, the clean, surgical result that defied every law of conventional warfare they had ever known. He let Thorne's awestruck question echo in the sudden quiet of the comms. Then he moved. He walked slowly, deliberately, from the central command dais toward the drone operator station where Lieutenant Commander Reed was now calmly shutting down the override protocols. Every eye followed him. The Admiral was a living legend, a man who had commanded SEAL Team 6 in its infancy and had forgotten more about special operations than most people ever learned. His approval was the gold standard, his disapproval a career-ending event. He stopped directly behind Reed's chair. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at her, at the back of her head, at the unassuming set of her shoulders. He remembered a briefing years ago in a windowless room deep inside the Pentagon. The project was called Project Chimera, a program to develop next-generation, non-kinetic engagement systems. The lead designer and test operator was a young lieutenant, a prodigy fresh from MIT and flight school, who could fly anything with wings, but was even better at flying things that were nothing but code and circuits. A pilot so unnaturally gifted at remote warfare, they had to create new metrics to even measure her performance. They gave her a call sign, one that reflected her uncanny ability to be everywhere and nowhere at once, to deliver effects on the battlefield with no visible cause. Spectre, Admiral Vance said, his voice quiet but carrying the force of a command across the entire JOC. I should have known. They told me you were assigned to Yucam Legal. A cover story, I presume. Reed finally turned her head, looking up at him. For the first time, a flicker of something other than placid neutrality crossed her face. It was recognition, a shared understanding between two people who belonged to a very small, very exclusive club. It's a quiet assignment, sir, she said, her voice a simple statement of fact. Vance allowed himself a small, grim smile. He then keyed his own command channel microphone, ensuring his voice went out to every headset on the net, including Thorne's. For those of you wondering who just saved Dr. Eris and the entirety of Valkyrie Element from a catastrophic failure, he began, his voice a low, rumbling growl of authority that demanded absolute attention. You are not to address her as ma'am or Lieutenant Commander. You will refer to her by her operational designator. You are in the presence of Spectre Prime. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Spectre Prime. It wasn't just a call sign. It was a title. It meant she wasn't just a Spectre operator. She was the first, the original, the one who wrote the doctrine. The Admiral wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to the assembled faces in the JOC, his eyes lingering on the intel officers and junior operators who had stared at Reed with the same dismissive incomprehension as Thorne. His voice became a lashing whip of cold, hard truth. Spectre Prime is the lead tactical developer and senior instructor for the R9X Mod 4 program. The weapon she just employed doesn't officially exist. The maneuver she just executed is not in any manual because she has not written it down yet. Her log combat hours on the Go 79er platform and its predecessors are over 9,000. That is not a typo. 9,000 hours. She has successfully engaged and neutralized more high-value targets from a chair like that one than any SEAL team has in the last decade. He let that sink in, a grenade of pure, unadulterated fact rolling into the center of the room. He then looked directly at the main communications officer. Log the engagement, he commanded. Threat neutralization, 2 hostiles. Asset, Spectre Prime. Authority, my own. Classification, Tier 1, codeword access only. And send a copy of that log to Senior Chief Thorne's encrypted terminal. I want him to read it. The finality in his tone was absolute. He had not just revealed her identity. He had consecrated it. He had taken the quiet, unassuming woman everyone had dismissed and unveiled her as a living weapon, a master of a new and terrifying form of warfare. He was shaming their assumptions, their arrogance, their primitive reliance on judging a warrior by the size of their biceps or the swagger in their walk. He turned back to Reed, and in a gesture that stunned the entire room into an even deeper silence, the 4-star Admiral, the supreme commander of the entire theater of operations, gave a slow, formal nod of profound respect. It wasn't a salute between ranks. It was a bow from one apex predator to another. Your secret's out, Spectre, he said, his voice softening slightly. Welcome back to the war. Reed simply nodded back, a mirror of his own gesture. Understood, sir, she replied, her voice still a quiet murmur. She then turned back to her console and began typing the after-action report, her focus already on the next task, the legend already beginning to form in the silent, astonished minds of everyone who had just witnessed the impossible. The quiet professional had spoken, and her single, silent action was louder than all the boasts and insults in the world. The story of the Spectre shot did not spread like wildfire. It spread like a shockwave, radiating out from the JOC in hushed, awestruck whispers. It wasn't gossip. It was the birth of a myth. The first to carry the tale were the communications technicians and intel analysts who had been in the room. They described the scene in fragmented, breathless sentences to their bunkmates. The impossible calm, the override codes, the call sign, the Admiral's reverence. They spoke of the drone feed, of the men who were there 1 second and gone the next, not in a spray of gore, but as if erased from existence by a divine hand. The story then reached the maintainers and armorers, men and women who dealt in the tangible physics of war. They argued about the weapon system. The R9X was known, but this Mod 4 was a phantom. They debated the ballistics, the terminal effects, the guidance systems, and concluded unanimously that it was black magic, something that belonged in a science fiction novel, not on an active battlefield. But the most potent messengers of the legend were the men of Valkyrie element, Thorne's SEALs. They had been on the receiving end of the miracle. They had heard Thorne's choked whisper over the comms. When they returned to the FOB hours later, grim-faced and exhausted, the first thing Thorne did was assemble his team in their private ready room. The encrypted log from Admiral Vance was displayed on their main briefing screen. 9,000 Kumba hours. The number hung in the air, a monument to a reality they couldn't fathom. Thorne, his face a mask of mortification and newfound humility, read the details of her service record aloud. He didn't skip a word. He spoke of her role in operations they had only heard of as rumors, classified missions in Syria, Yemen, and the Horn of Africa where entire enemy cells had vanished overnight, attributed to unknown assets. They were not unknown assets. They were her. She was the ghost in the machine they had been hearing stories about for years. I was wrong, Thorne said, his voice raw. I was arrogant. I was unprofessional. I judged a book by its cover, and that book just saved our lives and the life of that doctor. She did from a chair what we, with all our gear and all our training, could not do from 100 meters away. We owe her. I owe her. There was no argument. There was only a profound, collective silence as the team recalibrated their entire understanding of what a warrior was. The world was no longer just about kicking down doors and trigger pulling. There was a new kind of lethality, a quieter, more cerebral, and arguably more terrifying kind of power on the battlefield. The physical space of the FOB began to change. The chair Reed had used in the JOC was quietly cordoned off with a strip of engineer's tape by the night shift operators. Someone taped a small, handwritten sign to the monitor. Spectre Station. No one was ordered to do it. It just happened. It was a spontaneous act of reverence, the creation of a sacred space. The next day, at evening chow, the mess hall was a different world. The usual boisterous noise was muted, replaced by a low, respectful murmur. When Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed walked in, carrying her tray, a wave of silence followed her. It wasn't the awkward, isolating silence of the day before. It was a silence of deference, of awe. People didn't stare, but they watched from the corners of their eyes. They made way for her, clearing a path. The SEAL's table, Thorne's table, fell completely quiet. Reed, seemingly oblivious, went to her usual spot at a small, solitary table in the corner. She sat down and began to arrange her food with the same methodical precision as always. A moment later, a large shadow fell over her. It was Senior Chief Thorne. He wasn't flanked by his team. He was alone. He stood before her table, not in a relaxed posture, but in a rigid, formal position of attention, his hands cupped at his sides, his eyes fixed forward. He looked like a raw recruit in front of a drill instructor. Reed continued to eat, not acknowledging him. Thorne waited. He waited for a full minute, standing there in the silent mess hall, a public penance for his public sin. Finally, Reed placed her fork down and looked up at him. Her expression was neutral. "Yes, Senior Chief?" she asked, her voice quiet. Thorne swallowed hard, the sound audible in the stillness. "Ma'am," he began, his voice clear and formal, stripped of all its earlier bravado. "On behalf of myself and my team, I want to formally apologize for my conduct yesterday. My comments were unprofessional, disrespectful, and ignorant. There is no excuse for my behavior. You demonstrated a level of skill and professionalism that I failed to recognize. You saved my men. You saved our mission. We are in your debt." He paused, then added, his voice dropping slightly, filled with a genuine sincerity that was unmistakable. "Thank you, Spectre Prime." He had called her by her title. It was an admission of her status, a public acknowledgement of the new hierarchy. Reed looked at him for a long moment, her pale blue eyes seeming to analyze every ounce of his contrition. Then she gave a single small nod. "Apology accepted, Senior Chief," she said. "Your focus should be on your men and the next mission. That is all that matters." It was a dismissal, but it was also an absolution. She wasn't interested in his groveling. She was interested in the mission. It was the ultimate professional response. She then picked up her fork and resumed her meal. Thorne stood there for another second, then executed a crisp about-face and walked back to his table. He didn't speak to his team. He just sat down and stared at his tray, a man profoundly and permanently changed. The incident was over. The legend, however, was just beginning. A few days later, a young Air Force drone operator, the same captain who had given up his chair for Reed, saw her in a quiet corner of the rec center, reading a technical manual. He hesitated, then approached her cautiously. "Mung? Spectre? I was wondering, the way you compensated for the Coriolis effect on the R9XS flight path. I've never seen that algorithm used. Could you show me?" Reed looked up from her book, considered him for a moment, and then motioned to the chair beside her. "Sit down, Captain," she said. "Let's talk about terminal guidance." A year passed. The dust of that particular deployment settled, and the world moved on. But some things, once broken, are reforged stronger. Senior Chief Marcus Thorne, now promoted to Master Chief, stood before a class of new SEAL candidates at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. They were young, strong, arrogant, perfect reflections of the man he used to be. They had just completed a brutal training evolution, and their faces were masks of exhausted pride. Thorne let them catch their breath before he began his lecture. It was a lecture he had personally added to the curriculum, a session titled Unseen Threats and Professional Humility. He didn't use a PowerPoint. He just stood before them, his presence now radiating a quiet authority that was far more powerful than his old bluster. For the last 6 months, he began, his voice a low rumble, we have taught you how to be a hammer. We have taught you to be the most effective, most violent, most unstoppable kinetic instrument on the planet. And you're good at it. But I'm not here today to tell you how to be a hammer. I am here to warn you that not every problem is a nail. He paced slowly in front of them. Out there, you will encounter threats you cannot see. You will face enemies who do not carry a rifle. And you will work alongside warriors who do not look like you, who do not talk like you, and who do not fit your definition of the word. Your greatest enemy on the battlefield will not be an insurgent with an AK-47. It will be your own arrogance. It will be your assumptions. He stopped and looked them in the eyes. I'm going to tell you a story about a lieutenant commander I once met at FOB Archer. She was small, wore glasses, looked like a librarian. I made an assumption. I opened my mouth, and I disrespected her rank and her presence in a war zone. I did it publicly. I thought I was a hammer, and she was a pane of glass. He paused, letting the memory and his shame wash over him. That pane of glass turned out to be a diamond. Hours later, my team was pinned down, compromised, and minutes away from being wiped out. We had a hostage situation that had gone sideways, and we had no solution. We were the best of the best, and we were about to fail catastrophically. And from a command center miles away, that same officer I had insulted neutralized 2 hostiles, saved the hostage, and saved my entire team with a weapon system that we didn't know existed, using a technique that was considered impossible. She never raised her voice. She never left her chair. She just performed her function with a level of precision and calm that I have never witnessed before or since. The room was dead silent. The young SEALs were hanging on his every word. Her call sign is Spectre Prime, Thorne said, his voice filled with reverence. There's a control station at that FOB they call Spectre Station now. It's a shrine. Her story is a lesson. A lesson I learned the hard way. The most dangerous person on the battlefield is the one you dismissed. The quiet professional. The one who has mastered their craft so completely they have no need for ego. They don't need your approval. They don't need your respect. They only need you to be wrong. And when you are, they will solve the problem you couldn't. Your job is to be smart enough to get out of their way and let them work. The legacy of that single event rippled outward, becoming more than just a story. It became doctrine. The video file of the Spectre shot became the capstone lesson at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, shown to every new generation of drone operators and Top Gun pilots. It was a masterclass in precision, patience, and the philosophy of minimum force for maximum effect. It taught them that true power wasn't about the size of the explosion, but the precision of the impact. The concept of the quiet professional was no longer just an ethos for special operations teams. It began to permeate other communities, a shared value that celebrated demonstrated competence over performative toughness. The story of the arrogant SEAL and the quiet officer became a cautionary tale told to new lieutenants at OCS and to seasoned NCOs at the senior enlisted academies. It was a simple, powerful parable. Respect is earned through action, and assumptions are the enemy of survival. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Reed was never seen at FOB Archer again. She vanished back into the classified world from which she had briefly emerged, her work unseen, her name unspoken outside of secure facilities. But her presence remained. It remained in the quiet deference shown to the intel analysts. It remained in the new, more collaborative relationship between the operators and the support staff. It remained in the sign that still hung over Spectre Station, a permanent fixture in the JOC. Her legacy wasn't a medal or a plaque with her name on it. Her legacy was a change in culture. It was the humility of a master chief teaching a hard-learned lesson. It was the caution in the eyes of a young soldier before judging a fellow service member. It was 1,000 small moments of professional respect that would prevent 1,000 future mistakes. True legacy isn't the story you leave behind. It is the behavior that continues forward because of your example. It is not the echo of your own voice, but the chorus of others who have learned from your silence. It is the quiet competence that builds, the quiet discipline that endures, the quiet professionalism that ultimately defines the character of an entire service. It is the understanding that the greatest strength is not the power to command attention, but the quiet confidence that doesn't require it at all. It is the wisdom to know that in the modern age of warfare, the battle is often won not by the strongest arm or the loudest voice, but by the sharpest mind and the steadiest hand. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.